first off, I just want to thank everyone for being here. I know you had a lot of choices this morning across the 4 tracks. It's quite an amazing talk lineup. So definitely appreciate that you took the time out to come over and listen to Sean and I talk this morning. I'll try to dazzle you like you heard Sean say already. Our jokes are pretty bad, but I do see a lot of friendly faces out there, a lot of folks I recognize. So worst case scenario, if we do bomb up here, I'll get the polite clap, like, oh, yay, you're really bad, but I'm still clapping. So I get it, I understand that. So what we're talking about today, what Sean and I are going to discuss, is what we called Armadillo, and is a layered approach to portable security. Here's kind of what we're going to talk about, right? Some sweet agenda moves right here. Going to give you the so what, right? It's going to definitely kind of pave, Sean's going to talk through the picture of why this matters, and kind of lead into then the technical portion of it, where I'll cover phase 1, gathering, configuring, testing, employment, and of course, no good technical talk is not complete without the requisite future work associated with it, like where basically we like to put a positive spin on things and say, hey, this is where we should go, but really this is what we want to do, we failed to get there, but we put a positive spin and then we roll with it. A little bit about ourselves. Again, my name is Josh Rykowski. You can see my Twitter tag up there, @Ryko212. First and foremost, I'm a husband, father of 4. I've got my little fan club over here, came to see me talk this morning, and I appreciate that. I'm a programmer, love all things Python. I'm one of the admins on the runcode.ninja programming site. I'm also what I like to call a retro technologist, right? I like to fix and work on like 1980s technology, because nothing will ever recreate that smell you see or the smell you have and what you see when you get in there. At this point, I'll hand it off to Sean.
All right, so Sean Eyre, for those who haven't met me, which I think is most of you. So my Twitter handle is Oni49 if you're looking for me. That's pretty much any place that you see something like that, it's probably me. It's not a super common username. I am a programming enthusiast. I have somewhat of a CS background. I spend a lot of my time programming nowadays in Python because it's just a quick way to prototype whatever random thing that I'm working on at the moment. Have somewhat of a background in incident handling and incident response. And then forensics is something that I'm very passionate about. So if you want to hear me soapbox on it later, like come up and be like, forensics doesn't matter, and then we'll fight. OSINT is also something I've been doing since basically the topic came up when many of us were in high school and prior. Like most people, I got into that by stalking my family members on Facebook to figure out how to get access to their accounts when the security holes were all still there. That's actually what drives a lot of like my Python projects. Is I'll be working on some research project, be like, I could automate this instead of like doing this 50,000 times in a row. Besides that, runner, reader, play a lot of board games, play a lot of card games, like real ones, not Monopoly and stuff. And then like to be outside, which I know it's terrible for a computer person. Disclaimer at the bottom: anything we say does not reflect our employer. Our employer doesn't really care about this project either, so good enough. All right, next slide, please. All right, so thank you, Alex. I'm glad you care. If at any point we start floundering, we're just going to pass this off to random coworkers of ours to finish briefing. So why do we care? Why did we build Armadillo? So this is a great time to stop and tell the story of how we were working on a completely different project and grinding away at it, and then like one of us looks up from the laptop and is like, hey, what if we bought this, how expensive, $10 little 2-port router and turned it into like a portable security solution. And we start brainstorming this course, completely derail the research project for the day, and then we're like, hey, we could do this at BSides and like help other people learn how to do this kind of stuff. And that took on a life of its own, and this is what we call the good idea fairy and scope creep and all these other stuff. So the problem that we took at solving, I'm actually going to do this slide in kind of a jump around order. First and foremost, convenience. If you've ever gone out on like an incident response or something and wished you had your home playbook with you because you didn't print it out and then suddenly you don't have the internet access that you thought you did, this project is for you. Because you've probably heard people like Carlos Perez and other guys out there be like, I just download my GitHub onto my Raspberry Pi and take it with me, and I always have my playbook with me. So one of the first things we said is, what could we do to like take our Raspberry Pis with us, always be able to address it in the same way, so that I don't have to like scan the network that I'm on and be like, where did I plug my Pi into? Like, is it connected directly to the hotel Wi-Fi to get hacked because I didn't enable IP tables or something? And know where my network services that I depend on at home are with me when I'm traveling. So that was the first thing, a convenience factor and then a availability factor for the services you want to take with you. The other thing is hotel Wi-Fi nowadays is more and more the Wild West. Like it's always been, but it's getting worse. And here's why. Hotels are moving away from, first it was no encryption. Then we go into WEP, and like WEP is terrible, right? It's basically not encryption. And then we finally get a bunch of people using WPA2. We're like, yes, encryption. And they're like, availability. We're going to get rid of encryption entirely and go to captive portals, which there's a lot of reason to say that captive portals actually weaken your security and aren't a security feature whatsoever. It's somewhat of an availability control, but they're easily bypassed and whatnot. Which we'll hit on that really briefly, but that's not the topic of this talk. But we did do some research to figure out like some of the techniques that are out there, but that's not what we're talking about. So hotel Wi-Fi it's notoriously unsecure and it's notoriously unmanaged. It's basically a home Wi-Fi router that's been like propagated through several floors of a building kind of thing. That's a little bit reductive, but it's also not that inaccurate. And then it turns into a target-rich environment, which we'll actually talk about a little bit more. But when you're on a hotel Wi-Fi, like a lot of us are hackers in here or defenders in here. Like, have you ever gone to hotel Wi-Fi and just been like, I'll just scan it, see what's there, right? Like that's a really, really common threat case for these kind of environments that you're in. Or I'm connected to Starbucks Wi-Fi or whatever, McDonald's, and like someone's in the corner just like, I'm gonna see what mischief I can get into. So we've got like the script kiddie threat, and then we've also got the APT level threat, and we will actually justify that statement here in a second. Next slide, please. Is your threat model actually Russia? Well, in a hotel, it very well might be. Buy our product, $5. All right, so recently this has been really popular in the news. The Russians got caught by US Intel and Dutch Intel, and Wired reported on this, and a bunch of other people reported on this. October 4th was the last report that I actually read like in the news from Wired. You remember the two Russian guys that had the car full of like tech gear, and they roll up to a hotel and they've got out-of-band comms in there with GSM antennas. They've got GPS stuff. They've got a small portable server, and then they've got all their Wi-Fi access gear so they can interact with the Wi-Fi itself and then either crack the perimeter directly or log into it because it's like captive portal, Smith in room 350, right? And then they've got access to the network and they do whatever they want with those tools, and they can immediately do information gathering, use that server to deploy tools, or they can use the GSM to do out-of-band exfiltration. Completely nullify any security that that hotel may have had. And they've been, according to Wired, been doing this all over Eastern Europe. Any target that APT28 is interested in, they have these guys go park outside of the hotel, or maybe a couple blocks away with their little cantina, crack open the Wi-Fi and do whatever they want to it. They've also, APT28 specifically, have been phishing customers pretending to be booking going back at least as far as 2014. So like they've been taking advantage of the trust of hotels and hotel booking services for a long time. So the way the booking phish actually works is they clone the booking website, booking.com, and then they just spam people and be like, there's a problem with your reservation. You happen to have a reservation, and you click on it. Or maybe 28 actually popped booking, got the customer list, and did it in a more targeted fashion. We don't really know from what's reported in the news there. So there's this deliberate interest in getting to customers who travel, and then we get into what they've been doing that's really, really fascinating. As early as at least 2016, if not prior, they've been deliberately targeting hotel networks. Once they crack them open, they infect them, and then they go and actually target usually diplomatic targets that are staying at that hotel. So how that looks, since it evolved in 2017 with the emergence of Eternal Blue, is they drop onto the network with phishing. So they actually send it to the hotel admin. Person at the front desk is like, what's this PDF or what's this Excel sheet with the DDE auto in it? They open it up, and then now that they're hooked inside the network, they then smash and grab with Eternal Blue, is the TTP that emerged after WannaCry, made it really popular, and then they go and infect the network with Responder. Other things they're doing when they're on it, they're installing malware and hosting it, and then they're also doing silent credential harvesting. Slide, please. One of the ways they do that is basically putting a man in the middle at the gateway, and then you don't see that, unless you're using a site that does cert pinning. It's completely invisible to the regular user. If you are using cert pinning on a site, let's say you're going to Google or whatnot, then whatever your institutional training kicks in, you say, well, I'm trying to get to my own intranet site, and I'm used to clicking through the security warnings, so I'm just going to go there anyways, right? And then you get phished. So where this takes us, Wired has said that basically if you want to be safe on hotel Wi-Fi, don't use it. Bring your own hotspot. The FTC has said the same thing, that basically hotel Wi-Fi is unsafe. EFF has made a lot of similar arguments. EFF is actually really adamant that that captive portals are not the way to go because they completely destroy security. And then finally, we'll just call out that Dark Hotel, which is probably APT 28, has been doing this stuff for a really long time. That Better Business Bureau report is pretty decent, and the wired ones are pretty solid too. Next slide, please. So this gets into what does our little stack do and what does it not do. Well, unfortunately, we did not set out to beat APTs when we built this. So what it does, it does prevent your devices from being scanned because you put a firewall that denies any inbound, right? Which means it beats NSA, Eternal Blue, right? Well, allegedly NSA, but it doesn't necessarily beat APT 28 because APT 28 on your hotel is doing a man-in-the-middle. So it goes into the second bullet. We don't stop man-in-the-middle stuff. We don't stop your traffic from being sniffed because you're still communicating with the internet. But there are ways we could upgrade this project to do that, such as a VPN connection at the edge, which the open word on the router actually would support. Or you could do some sort of filtering where it doesn't allow you to actually leave your own trusted enclave unless you're on HTTPS or some similar secure protocol. And you could also put some software on the edge that would force you into those tunnels as well. So next slide, please.
All right, Sean. So now that Sean is completely dark in the room with the doom and gloom, and everyone's thinking, oh my goodness, how bad is it out there? I'm going to go ahead and pick up the ball and run with it. Thanks for the setup, Sean. I appreciate it. Everyone's going to hate you and love me. It's perfect. It works out, right?
I thought we were doing bad cop, bad cop.
Yeah, I know, right? So phase 0, right? So at this point, I'm going to start talking through the process. If you wanted to build one of these stacks, how you'd go about it. So up here, just to highlight how small this is, I've got the an entire stack built right here. All the way from the power supply on my right to the actual router, switch, and Raspberry Pi. So it's tiny, fits in your bag, very quick, very easy to put together. So a phase 0 for us ended up being just the gathering of equipment, right? So we identified, hey, we needed some way to connect to the Wi-Fi in the hotel in a fashion that we can also provide some standoff for our devices behind it. So what we did is we were looking out there and we tried to find the smallest router that we could, and so here a little bit of a scale. So these are the actual Wi-Fi routers here. To take a look at that, the cost we figured out were about $16, depending on where you source them from. Now I will say this. What's it?
China.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, definitely go to AliExpress.com or whatever to order them. However, that being said, we didn't use the original firmware on there, right? Because if you get it, it's a very bland firmware, kind of hard to use. So how many people in here are familiar with DDWRT? All right, enough. So the next couple of slides, I'll start talking about that a little bit. And for those of you who don't know, I'll try to give a little background so you understand what that actually is. So the actual Wi-Fi router, about $16 per router, and it provides that client connection and also the security aspect, because we can apply some IP tables rules to the router to, like what Sean said, do that kind of deny any inbound. And also, if you wanted to add custom rules to it, you have that ability. The next is, okay, now that we've got connection to the Wi-Fi, how do I distribute that out to my clients or my devices? And so we looked for, again, just Google, small 5-port switch. And just like with the router, it brought me back to AliExpress. But I found a Daewoo 5-port switch, about $9 per switch. So this is the network distribution, 5 ports on it. And really, when it's all said and done, and you get it set up in this fashion, you've got 3 usable ports, because one port is used to connect to the router itself. Another port is connected to the Pi on the bottom. And so you get 3 usable ports out of it. And then finally, a Raspberry Pi to round out the stack. Now, this is kind of an optional piece, right? For this to be a security stack, you don't need the Raspberry Pi on there. However, we added it on, and we kind of recommend that because it allows you to basically clone or download or have anything that you would need local that you don't want to pull across the internet, right? So if, like what Sean said earlier with the incident response, maybe I don't have internet access, so if I have a local repo, I can go and pull from that. Or if it's something where I don't want to tip my hand and start pulling some of my own tools over the network, it allows us to do a local repository. Next slide, please. All right.
So this results in this really super complicated network diagram. So what we've actually implemented is all but 2 of the devices on here. So at the very top level, you have a router firewall because the DD word is actually letting us run the firewall. It's IP tablespace firewall. There's a GUI to interact with it, but you could also, for your advanced rules, you have to actually go in and understand IP table syntax. Then we have the layer 2 dumb switch, your file server down at your bottom left, and then obviously your laptop is plugged into it in the middle. The 2 things we wanted to call it that you can expand it, as we put on this board, we have the 2 next routers here, and again, this is just for scale. that second next router can be put into a Wi-Fi access point mode instead of a client mode. And then if you set up your IP scheme correctly, you can still access the services on the Pi. So while we didn't prove it in this particular stack, it would make it a little bit bigger. You can definitely like connect to your hotel Wi-Fi and then host your own Wi-Fi for all of your devices. So if you need to share the services, you need more than 3 ports available, you can do that. Finally, we wanted to call out like this layer 2 switch does not support it. But if you upgrade it to a really simple smart switch, which I have a Linksys one at home, it's much bigger and it can't be powered over USB, but I can do port mirroring on it. So if I wanted to install any sort of network security monitoring, I'd upgrade the switch, and then I'd plug in another Pi and run Bro on it, which we've proved works. Obviously, your main constraint there is going to be the amount of storage that you have and the way that you want to interact with that in like an intelligent way so you can actually pull value out of the data that you're collecting. Next slide, please.
All right, and so like I've already pointed out, up here, just the finished product. I mean, it's tiny. It fits in the palm of your hand. It's very easy to go and throw in your luggage once you have it built. And if you didn't notice, this is just a simple powered USB hub right here. So everything that I have in this stack does not need its own wall wart. So the router and the switch itself pulls about a ½ amp each, so that you can easily plug those in USB to your computer in a pinch. Now the Pi, that's a little harder. The boot up process, gets about 2.5 amps. However, it's easy to make it to find power if you leave your power brick at home. Next slide, please. All right, then we went on to configuring all the things. Right, so now that we went ahead and bought everything, had a big pile. UPS was my fan at that point because they kept on delivering packages and I got them. So what we started with this particular configuration is we took the router and, like I said, the existing firmware on that NEXX router was, I won't say it's horrible, but it was definitely clunky, wasn't a pleasure to work with. So what we did is we went ahead and downloaded OpenWRT and went ahead and flashed the device. The good news is there's an existing binary to do that. You can go ahead and go find that, that binary out there. In fact, if you just go to the DDWRT site, you can download that. Now, a little bit of background information. So for those of you unfamiliar with DDWRT, it's essentially a custom firmware for routers that gives essentially the user back a lot of the power and a lot of the ability to configure anything you want on it. If you've never dealt with DDWRT before, it is complex sometimes. It is overwhelming. The good news is, once you flash this router with DDWRT, you really don't have to configure much more if you don't want to. It works once you get it flashed, it boots right up, and really the only thing you have to do is go in there and apply a password to protect the actual admin page. So once we got the actual firmware flashed onto the router itself, went through the process of configuring. Like the configuration is as simple as just applying a password. Now, if you wanted to go in and go a little deeper than that, you can go ahead and set some of your static IP assignments so you're going to have certain devices, like say for instance you got your Raspberry Pi there, and you want to be able to access that file share on the Raspberry Pi. You can go in and have that go in static IP assignment in there. And then finally, if needed, kind of what Sean and I talked about earlier, is you can go and update the IP tables rules. Now, who here has actually done IP tables rules updates? I've got a few. Who enjoys updating IP tables rules? Yes, I got one taker in the back. Fantastic. The rest of us, we look at it and we essentially hit the keyboard 8,000 times until it works, right? Because you never get it right the first time. You just keep slapping the keyboard. The good news about DDWRT is you can update the IP tables rules from the website configuration, right? So you don't have to actually go to the command line and do that. You can actually have your rules and just apply them in a nice little text box in the configuration page for the router and then have it update for that. So it makes it a little easier to get after. As far as configuring the switch, it was really nothing, right? Just plug the power in, make the Ethernet connections, and it just works. Again, it's an unmanaged switch, the dumb switch. It just passes all traffic. And then finally, for the Pi, again, with the optional piece of the security stack, it really depends on what you're trying to do with it. At this point, you just need to install the packages you want to have available to you, local GitHub repo, a Plex server, file server, anything like that. You just need to go and pull down and do that as part of this configuration phase. Next slide, please. All right, the firewall, right? So you've looked up there, there's one little bullet that jumps out. It's red. Why do you think I put that red? I see a few people chuckling. It's a lesson learned for us, right? So it's one of those things, and Sean can attest to this.
Yeah, so what I did, and this is actually how we learned that for sure that if we factory reset the device, we wouldn't wipe the new firmware because we had to factory reset it. I put that first bullet rule in because I was like, I'm going to secure this firewall, right? And I didn't specify that it was the WAN port that I was talking about there, so I locked us out of the entire device in the middle of working on it one day. So yeah, if you deny everything coming into the device, you can't even talk, you can't SSH into it, you can't talk to the HTTP daemon at all. So instead, what you want to do, it actually puts a specific new IP tables chain in for you to interface with just the WAN. So you want to go in and go to just that spot and drop everything coming in. Different philosophical discussions on whether or not you want to drop or reset, etc. I actually am of the camp that you should drop because then nothing is there as opposed to a filtered port is there. So that's what I would recommend to do that. You also, in the GUI on the tab next to where you can actually type in the IP tables rules, there's a whole like checklist of stuff that's on by default. And they're all like allow rules. Go into there if you decide to do this, uncheck all of them, except for what allows you to connect to the network that's performing your backbone function, and allow that network to assign you DHCP, and that's all you really need to get going.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, so just, again, it's one of those things where, if you're knee-deep in the research and you're cruising right along and you got a lot of momentum and all of a sudden you're like, hey, why is my console not responding anymore? Stuff happens, I'll be first to say that, trial by error works best because you learn not to do that again. However, the true lesson we got out of it is once you flash the firmware onto that router, if you do a factory reset on the router, it just factory resets the DDWRT. It doesn't try to pull the old firmware. It doesn't do anything like that. And so you're able to just go back to a fresh install of DDWRT. So again, nice little lesson learned in this kind of the piece we're doing here, the configuration. And finally, at the bottom there,
explain a little more on that. So some of you are probably looking at us like you flash the firmware. Of course, whenever you reset the device, it's going to go back to that. The reason we were concerned about it with this device is the next router actually has a small bit of memory, of writable memory that is static and on the chip. And that is advertised as basically the way to not accidentally lock yourself out by putting on faulty firmware. So essentially, it's Nex's persistence on there that they can use to restore their original firmware. So we were concerned that if we had to do a complete reset, it would actually go all the way back to that stored memory, which we've done no forensics to see whether or not that's doing anything malicious, so that's on you. If you trust it, go for it. But we did end up testing that on accident, and that's actually like the first time I can say I used a lockpick to crack into a router, because that was the smallest device we had to push the pin. So there we go.
And then just to close up the slide right here, at the end though, you have the ability to add IP tables rules to suit. So whatever your environment is, whatever you are hosting, locally, you can go and add those rules to it as you see fit. And like I said, with the DDWRT configuration page, it makes applying IP tables rules easy. It's literally a little text box. You throw the rule in there, you apply it. It does a quick soft reboot of the device, and then it applies it. Allows you to do some checking configuration. It's not the command line. You do have access to the command line if you want to. However, this makes it a little easier and a little more approachable. Next slide, please. All right, testing, right? So at this point, you can say it's safe, you can say it's secure all you want, but without any sort of actual testing, you don't know it works. And so at this stage, you want to go ahead and conduct robust testing prior to use. You want to make sure that the things you're blocking can't get through. You want to make sure the things you're hosting internally can actually still function, right? If they still need to get to the client device, you need to make sure those IP tables rules aren't blocking anything internally as well. So, like I said, you want to start with your external connection. Validate that you can pass traffic. Validate, kind of what Sean and I did on the fly. Make sure you can still, push traffic in and out on the periphery of the device. Second is then you want to validate or check those internal connections. You want to make sure that all the PI services can be reached. You want to make sure that the client that you connect to the switch can go and reach those services and back and forth. And then finally, security testing. I mentioned that already, but you want to test your IP tables rules. You want to validate that they work. You want to make sure they're doing exactly what you think they're doing, because I don't know about you, but sometimes, IP tables is a trial by error. I think it's doing this. Well, let me validate. Oh, no, wait, it's not. Okay, because I either, flushed them before, I dumped everything out, so it's not chaining properly. There's a lot in there, but just make sure, basically, there should be a script or something, like I said, a screenshot. Just make sure you can easily script this out to go ahead and test that, and that way you can just have a quick little fire and forget for the test as you produce this or as you build these for your own use. Next slide, please. Finally, employment, right? So at this phase, you've done all the fun stuff of ordering it, getting in, putting it together, configuring everything. Now it's employment. Connecting to a network. it's simple with the DDWRT firmware on the router, but it's still a process because you have to go into the device, you've got to dig through the menu. Like I said, if you've never worked with DDWRT before, it is kind of overwhelming. But once you find it, you can simply put the router into client mode and tell it to connect to a wireless network as a client itself. And then once it's connected, if it's any sort of a captive portal, you know, the minute you connect the client to the switch, you are then redirected to that captive portal. So if you need to still sign through that, you have that ability. Next is making sure that the network services are configured to start a boot, right? This is really more of configuration of the Pi, right? Plex server, file server, whatever your imagination is. But really the key that we're looking at for these network services internal is anything you want locally that you don't want to pull over the internet. Either, you know, sensitive files or things that may tip your hand or tools that may, you know, be caught in any sort of, you know, firewall or whatnot. You know, just anything you want to host locally goes there, and use your imagination for that. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand off to Sean for the future work piece.
All right, future work. Yeah, no project is complete without recognizing what you didn't do. So putting a VPN of some kind on the edge is a great way to step this project forward and make it where you're immune to sniffing whenever you're on whatever dirty internet that you're on. The thing to keep in mind with something like that, though, is you're transferring the trust. So if you've never thought through the trust problem of, am I trusting the hotel Wi-Fi or am I trusting a VPN provider, you want to make sure that you pick a VPN provider, one that lets you install a cert on a router and doesn't limit you just to client devices, but two is trustworthy not to intercept your traffic and to sell that off to people that you don't want to have your data. The answer to that question, to just go into a privacy soapbox for like 2 seconds, is on you to figure out. Who do you want to have your data and why, or who do you not want to have your data and why, and that will guide you into who you want to use as VPN provider. I personally use PIA because it meets my personal needs. Private Wi-Fi, so you can throw the second NEX on there, configure it as a Wi-Fi hotspot instead of as a client, and then you just need to basically, like we said earlier, make sure that your IP scheme is correct and is routing correctly. By default, they will use the same IP scheme, and then it will not work for you to go across one router into the identical other network, basically, and then get over to your Pi. So you need to make sure that you set it up because it is performing as a router and not as a switch when it's in that mode. And then finally, if you want to build out internal network security monitoring, it's a matter of upgrading a little bit of the infrastructure, which means you're going to have to change your power scheme a little bit. But then once that's done, it's what do you want to do and how small do you want to try to keep it in order to watch what's going on in your little network.
All right, so at this point, I mean, we've talked about everything we wanted to talk about with you. We do have the link up there. Now, it's still a work in progress. We plan on hanging our testing scripts on there. We plan on posting our configurations and everything we've done so far to that link. So if, we also have links to purchase the different pieces of this configuration. So if you wanted to go ahead and build one yourself, you know, hit that up. You know, give us another day or two to kind of tidy it up, though. You'll get a gist of it when you go there right now. But again, there's still a few more things we want to fill it out with. So at this point, I just wanted to open up the floor for any questions that you may have, for anything we've talked about between the actual so what with the threat modeling all the way to our actual implementation of this device. Yes, sir.
So right now we don't have any NSM installed, but the proof of concept I did actually on my home network was running Bro, and that was it. Obviously, Bro doesn't really have a GUI, so if you don't want to use BroCut or awk and sed and all that stuff, you've got to do something on top of that. And you start pushing the Pi's computational power, like if you want to run Splunk on it or something like that. But too easy to set up Bro on it. I'm pretty sure, not Security Onion, but Snort would work if you wanted to as well, Suricata. All your really simple solutions that can run off of NetSniff NG or something similar should work. Say again? Yes. 3B plus.
You know, also too, when you're thinking about that NSM piece, you know, and you think about how the Pi is relatively low powered for something like that, look at the scale of the network. Think about a couple of clients on there, not passing all that much traffic, and so you know, if you think it can't keep up, I mean, I'm thinking it'd fare fairly well for the scope that we're looking at for this.
That does bring up a good point, though. The NICs on the WAN NICs on these end up more or less limiting you to. If you go over Wi-Fi, it's 100 megabits per second. Your Pi is limited to that as well because of the way that it connects the NICs to the rest of it. It basically runs over the USB hub. So if you do it for this or for a similar project, you want to use a Pi as an NSM monitoring device of some kind, you cannot expect to not drop packets unless your network is, there or lower. For home use, probably going to be okay, especially around here where WoW's like, you get 60 megabits, yay. But for anything bigger, you're going to need to cluster instead of just running one. Now, for this little device, yeah, it's going to get the job done. But.
Yes.
You could, and there are projects out there that have proved that that's possible to use the Pi as the pass-through device. We chose to put more standoff between where the services are hosted and that, but when we were initially doing this, that was actually our fallback plan if we couldn't get the next to work.
Yeah, something to keep in mind as well when you're doing like that. I don't know how the B plus is or the 3B plus because I haven't tested on that, but in previous iterations of the Pi, when you're trying to use it as a wireless router, it gets pegged pretty quick as far as resources. Again, I can't talk for this one because I haven't done it, but I know in the two and previous iterations, it got pegged really quickly. So that's good. That's a good question, though. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Potentially. So let's talk hypotheticals. Say you've got a Kodi server running, and you don't want the way that Kodi talks out to fingerprint itself on the network, and so you just get your legitimately obtained movie files and you load them on your Kodi server, and then at your firewall you say, Kodi, you can't talk to the internet because you already have all the stuff that you need. Now, no one says, oh, you're running a Kodi server, you must also be illegally downloading movies. So you could do some finagling to do stuff like that if you wanted to. The better way, if you want that service to also have internet connectivity, is to wrap it up in a VPN so nobody can inspect it.
All right, any other questions? Yes? Okay, yeah, I failed to mention that. So the actual rack itself is 3D printed, so if you don't have a 3D printer or access to one, you need to, right? Either way, because I love my 3D printer. I like to print stuff just because. However, when you do go to the actual site, so the plans for this are open source out there on a site called Thingiverse. If you've never been there, and if you have a printer, check it out. But you can go and download and print these. I mean, I think this entire stack right here took about an hour and a half to print on my printer. Very easy to put together. Again, though, Sean and I toyed around with the idea of just taking everything out of the rack and just duct taping it together, because at the end of the day, you just want something that's portable and you can plug into, right? So really, I mean, this is just a nice little prettification of the device, but you can really just duct tape things into a ball, leave the ports open, and just plug some power to it. Because it gets the job done, right? If it looks like garbage but still works, is it really garbage? I don't think so. What's that? Exactly.
So, and these 3D printed racks are actually, this is a stack of 3 racks that are printed, because the design that we found is actually modular, so then you can connect them together, and it's got a little slide, actually. So what you can't, it's
that's it right there. That's what made the talk, was that slide.
Yeah. Unfortunately, when you actually install it, your wires are in the way, because it was designed for Raspberry Pi, but once you start putting in it, you can see like the Raspberry Pi's NICs are forward facing, so the slide works. But when you put it different devices that it wasn't designed for, the wires promptly start getting in the way. But you don't necessarily need to constantly be using the slides. And then the adjustment that Josh actually made I'm actually going to unplug this so people can see. Actually, I'll pull it out of here. Is we actually put a bar in there to hold it in place so that you can actually use a Allen wrench to adjust this bolt and then hold things down. And then actually on the one that holds the Pi, we don't do that because we can actually bolt the Pi directly in. So it already had the mounting spots for the Pi itself, and we just added longer bolts in the crossbar so that you could hold other devices in. So.
Long live open source. I love it. Yes, sorry, did I answer your question? Okay, and then over here. So definitely a thought crossed our mind. So running the actual switch and the router off a battery pack would probably work extremely well, right? The max pull or max amperage on both of those is about half an amp. And so if you do that and you do the math on your, even a small battery pack with like 1,800 milliamp hours, I mean, you can get a pretty decent runtime off of both of those running the whole time. Now, you add the Pi to it, all bets are off, because, you know, I mean, there's so much variance in the power pull of a Pi, depending on if it's under load, if it's not under load. But if you just want to run the actual networking devices, that would probably run really well off of a power pack. The main thing you want to make sure is that the power pack can actually has the max pull for it, right? Because you're plugging 2 devices in, so it's going to have a max pull of like 1 amp at one time. So that's all I'll check for the power. That's a good question, though. It would make it even more portable with a battery.
Yes, with a good battery, you could run this on an airplane, so you could get to your movies and whatnot.
Awesome. Any other questions? All right. Well, what do you want to do for? All right. So we got some giveaways here, right? So BSides is not a, yeah, exactly. Yay, they're done. I don't know if you're clapping for the giveaways or for us. Thank you, though. I appreciate it. Boosting my confidence here. Yeah. All right. So let's see here. This is cracking codes with Python. Who here likes Python? Yeah. Awesome, right? Those of you who didn't raise your hand, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. You're being forced to take it. Fair enough. Well, you know, you'll learn to love it if they bludgeon you with it enough. Exactly, right? So cracking codes with Python. What is the Python library that allows me to do hashing? So I had a hand up. You guys want to fight for it? Go ahead and knife you for it. All right, cracking codes. Hashlib was that. So if you want to do any sort of hashing in Python, the library is hashlib. This is a personal favorite of mine right here. If you've never seen this book and you're learning Python, you need to take a look at it. It's called Automate the Boring Stuff with Python. It's amazing.
You don't even know what the question is.
Yeah, he's like, I'll just answer, I'll take it. You know what, I like your enthusiasm. You know what, this is yours. There you go. That way you can go ahead and hit yourself with the book as you're learning Python. There it is. Fantastic. All right, next up we have the Blue Team Handbook Incident Response Edition. And the Blue Team Handbook with the threat hunting use cases, the new version that just came out recently. So these are written by, if you don't know, written by Don Murdoch, and these are both autographed by Mr. Murdoch himself.
Who is speaking at the conference today?
Yes, he's speaking. If you haven't seen that on the schedule, got any good ideas for?
Trying to come up with an incident response based question, but okay. This is a softball, so please somebody get this. What is the first thing that you should capture when you're responding to a computer that you think is infected? First hand. Oh, no. Sir, he beat you, I'm sorry. Yep. Specifically dynamic memory, right? Because if you go straight to the image, you're going to miss a couple things. One, you can distort the dynamic memory. But 2, you want to do things like look in the dynamic memory and see if that image is full disk encrypted or not, and that's going to determine how you're going to go into and actually pull that image. Because if it's full disk encrypted, you're going to pull a logical one, right? And if it's not, you're going to pull a bit-by-bit image. We've seen some interesting things when people are like, it was infected, so I shut it off. Great, no crypto keys.
One more.
Remember that trivia question you asked last year about Pac-Man?
Oh, sweet. So I'm a retro technologist, right? And so I love all things 1980s technology or bust. So some of you have heard this question. So if you've answered it before or heard me before, don't answer. Fair enough. So Pac-Man. Everyone loves Pac-Man, right? So how many levels are there in Pac-Man? Alex. And how do you know it's 256? It's a trick question, because you get to 256. Does anyone know what happens when you get to level 256 in Pac-Man? It doesn't die. Yeah, you get some weirdness going on, right? There's a register overflow, and then the screen, half the screen blocks out. All the actual pellets are in the same location. You just can't see them. The ghosts are still chasing you. And so what's really amazing is the folks that have gotten the perfect scores in Pac-Man, they have memorized the pattern to the point where they know where everything's at. And so if you ever see someone do a run on Pac-Man, take a look at it. It's amazing. They can do that whole maze without even seeing it. So it's kind of a cool little trivia thing. But it's simply because someone didn't take into account, hey, if we hit 256, there's something that happens, you know, voltage goes out of one of the chips and nothing's there to catch it, and it throws the whole system in chaos. So awesome. So we handed those out. Again, Sean and I will be up here for any questions you have after the fact. we appreciate your time and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Okay, if you want to work on your Python, go to Run Code's workshop this afternoon. It's going to be solid.